The rain began just before dawn. It wasn't a storm, no thunder, no lightning. Just a steady, soft curtain of gray that painted the world in quiet sorrow. In a grand estate perched above the hills, sunlight tried to break through the gloom, but the bridal suite remained dim. Gilded mirrors lined the walls. Chandeliers glittered above, and flowers spilled from every corner like they were trying to distract her from the truth. Isla sat still in front of the mirror, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her wedding veil, long sheer embroidered with hand-stitched pearls, felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her lips were painted a soft rose, her hair curled into gentle waves. But her eyes were wrong. They held no sparkle, no joy, only fear. She looked like a girl dressed up to play bride, trapped in a life-size dollhouse, in a gown that didn't feel like hers. A soft knock. Her father entered without waiting for a reply. "They're ready," he said flatly, adjusting the cufflinks she had bought him for his birthday years ago when they still laughed together, when he still listened. She rose, her knees wobbling slightly. "Dad, please." He turned his gaze sharply toward her. "We discussed this. You know what's at stake. This is the only way to keep our name out of ruin." Isla's throat burned. Her voice was paper thin. "But what about me?" Silence. He straightened his jacket. "You'll be married to a man who has everything. You'll be taken care of. That's more than most get." The door closed behind him. Downstairs, the air was cold, despite the candles and roses. The ceremony took place in the private chapel of the Alaric estate, where old portraits of stoic ancestors watched from the walls. Rows of people sat polished and polite. A violin played something soft and sorrowful. And then he arrived, Cashin Alaric, tall, impeccably dressed, his face unreadable, his expression distant. Like this entire event was a meeting on his calendar he simply had to attend. He didn't greet her, didn't offer a hand. His gaze flicked to her face and then away, like he didn't want to see the fear in her eyes. He stood beside her, his posture perfect, but he did not reach for her hand. Isla's breath caught as the officiant began to speak. She tried to listen, to hold on to each word like a raft, but all she heard was her own pulse pounding. She looked at Cashin again, searching for anything, curiosity, sympathy, even disdain, but there was nothing. He was a man carved from marble, cold, still, unreachable. When it was time for her vows, her fingers trembled around the tiny note card she had written them on. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she had to swallow hard to finish. Cashin's vows? "I do." That was it. No promises, no tenderness, just 2 words that sealed her fate. The guests applauded politely. A flashbulb went off. Her father smiled. Cashin didn't. The reception was a blur. Speeches she didn't hear. Champagne she didn't drink. Cashin said all the right things to the right people, shook hands, nodded, made no mistakes. But he never looked at her. Not once. And then the car ride. Silent, long, stiff. The Blake mansion, sprawling, glass-walled, and perched atop a cliff, felt less like a home and more like a beautifully furnished trap. When the butler opened the double doors, Isla stepped inside and instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. She'd never seen such beauty paired with such hollowness. Cashin said nothing, only handed her a folded note. "Your room is at the West Wing. If you need anything, the housekeeper is named Nella." See, that night, Isla stood on a marble balcony of her new bedroom, barefoot in her wedding gown, and watched the sea crash against the rocks. Somewhere in the East Wing, Cashin Blake was doing the same, watching her silhouette like a question he wasn't ready to ask. Hello, my beautiful souls, and welcome to the chapters of love, where sometimes love is hidden behind locked doors, and other times it blooms in the darkest rooms. Tonight, we begin a journey not a fairy tale, but of something deeper, where duty, betrayal, and unexpected tenderness dance in delicate steps. Have you ever been asked to pay for someone else's mistake? Have you ever walked into something you didn't choose, only to find a part of yourself waiting on the other side? If this story is already stirring your heart, subscribe and tap that like button and tell me, what does real love look like to you? And would you walk down that aisle? Now, let's continue. because not all cold hearts stay frozen forever. Long before she would avail of silence, Isla Whitmore lived in a small, sun-drenched village nestled between green hills and wild meadows. It was a place where time seemed slower, where the only traffic was the rustle of leaves in the wind and the laughter of children echoed through winding lanes. She had grown up in a modest stone cottage with ivy crawling up the windows and her favorite cherry blossom tree just outside her bedroom. Her mother died when Isla was 10, leaving behind her perfume, her soft-voiced lullabies, and the smell of old books she'd leave half-read on the kitchen table. Her father, Richard Whitmore, had once been a well-respected businessman with a warm laugh and a pocket full of dreams. But that version of him didn't last. After her mother passed, something in Richard cracked. The sparkle in his eye dimmed, replaced by numbers that never added up. He stopped attending village meetings, started drinking, gambling, slipping in and out of debt like it was a tide he couldn't escape. His reputation, once clean, began to rot slowly under whispers. Still, Isla held on to her dreams. She loved stories, fairy tales, fables, poetry, and always wanted to become a teacher, imagining rows of little desks and shelves full of books with her name stamped on the inside cover. But with each passing year, that dream felt further away. Because while other girls her age were planning their futures, Isla was learning to hide the eviction notices, to stretch tea and toast into dinner, to pretend her father's temper was just stress and not the storm brewing inside him. She never blamed him, not fully, but the man who once tucked her in and made up bedtime stories became a stranger. The debts piled up, the creditors circled, and Isla learned how to be small, invisible, obedient. Across the country, in the steel-gray towers of Blake Tecca's empire, another child grew up watching the world through glass, protected, privileged, and utterly alone. Cashin Blake was a boy who never smiled in photos, not because he didn't know how, but because he didn't see the point. His mother was elegance and ambition in designer heels, but she was never maternal. When Cashin was 9, she left. No goodbye. Just a letter folded on the kitchen island and a swirl of perfume in the air. His father, Lawrence Blake, never recovered. A visionary in the tech world, Lawrence was a man of code and control, not comfort. After his wife vanished, he buried himself in his company and expected his son to do the same. Don't feel, build. That became the unspoken rule of the Blake household. Cashin, ever the dutiful heir, did exactly that. He built walls around himself, perfected the art of distance. He excelled in school, mastered business before his voice even fully matured, and ran Blake Tecca's philanthropic arm by the age of 23. But emotions, closeness, vulnerability, those were weaknesses. Cashin never dated seriously, never brought anyone home. The world saw a powerful young CEO with an icy stare and an impenetrable schedule. But no one saw the late nights in the Blake Tech offices, the untouched meals, or the half-burned letters he'd never had the courage to send to his mother. He didn't love. He didn't trust. He didn't believe in promises. Until everything changed with a name. Richard Whitmore, in a last desperate bid to cover his mounting debts, had begun laundering donations from Blake Tecca's charitable education fund, a fund personally managed by Cashin's father. It wasn't just fraud. It was betrayal. And it went deeper than the balance sheets. Because Lawrence Blake had started the education fund in memory of his sister, who died without ever accessing formal schooling. He'd poured his personal savings into that project. For him, it was sacred, and now it was compromised. Lawrence Blake discovered the embezzlement only months before his death. Already sick, already fading, he summoned Cashin to his hospital room. The beeping machines filled the silence as he looked at his son with a rare flicker of emotion. "I trusted Richard," Lawrence rasped, "and I failed. But the daughter, Isla, she's innocent." Cashin said nothing. "I need to make this right, Cashin. Promise me." Lawrence's voice cracked. "Marry her. Protect her. Keep her out of the scandal. The board won't touch her if she becomes family. She's the only one who shouldn't pay for this." Cashin was stunned. "You want me to marry her? A stranger? A Whitmore?" That was all Lawrence said. Cashin thought about it for days. He read everything he could find about Isla, saw a few photos of her in the countryside, holding books, smiling softly in ways that didn't feel posed. She was young, quiet, obscure, not his type, not his world. But still, something about her expression stayed with him. She didn't look like a woman who belonged in a scandal. She looked like someone who still believed in things. Fairy tales, perhaps. Happy endings. Cashin didn't believe in either, but he believed in loyalty. And Lawrence's final wish was clear. So he made the call. The arrangement was negotiated quietly. Richard agreed without hesitation, relieved to avoid prison, eager to attach his sinking name to the Blakes. Isla was told the truth in fragments. "This is to protect the family," her father had said. "You'll be safe. You'll be wealthy. He won't hurt you. Just do this one thing." She didn't know Cashin. She didn't know about the fund, or the embezzlement, or the scandal waiting in the wings. All she knew was that her life had shrunk to the size of her father's mistakes. And now she had a choice. Let him drown them both, or marry a stranger with a crown of ice and a promise of silence. When the wedding day came, the rain was not a coincidence. It was a benediction from the sky, mourning for a girl who once dreamed of classrooms and chalkboards, and a boy who stopped believing in warmth. They came from two broken homes. Isla with her soft-spoken sorrow, and Cashin with his elegant detachment. They were never supposed to fall in love. But fate doesn't follow logic. It follows longing. And sometimes, even cold hearts carry the ache of what could have been. The wedding photos looked perfect, but none of them captured the truth. Behind Isla's delicate smile was a girl unraveling. Behind Cashin's tailored tuxedo stood a man made of stone. When the vows were over, they rode back to Blake Estate in a black Rolls-Royce, seated beside each other but a world apart. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was deafening. Cashin stared out the window like he was driving into a contract, not a future. Isla twisted her wedding ring, unsure if it meant anything at all. The Blake mansion, sprawling glass-walled and perched atop a cliff, felt less like a home and more like a beautifully furnished trap. When the butler opened the double doors, Isla stepped inside and instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. She'd never seen such beauty paired with such hollowness. Cashin said nothing, only handed her a folded note. "Your room is at the West Wing. If you need anything, the housekeeper is named Nella." See, that night, Isla stood on the marble balcony of her new bedroom, barefoot in her wedding gown, and watched the sea crash against the rocks. Somewhere in the East Wing, Cashin Blake was doing the same, watching her silhouette like a question he wasn't ready to ask. The days that followed were a study in distance. Isla tried to be graceful. She greeted him each morning when they crossed paths in the hallway. She thanked him when she received access to the library. She left a small note beside the teapot one morning, offering to make him ginger tea for his cold. He never replied. Their dinners were quiet, formal affairs. 2 forks, 1 wine glass. No laughter. Cashin answered questions with single words. Sometimes, he didn't answer at all. She began to spend most of her time in the solarium, sketching or reading under the filtered sun. There, the silence didn't hurt so much. She drew memories of home, wildflowers, her late mother's smile, the stone bridge by the riverbank, but her fingers betrayed her heart. Without meaning to, she sketched him, Cashin, at the dining table, with his unreadable expression. Cashin, standing by the windows, half shadowed by rain. Cashin, as she imagined him as a boy, lonely, eyes too wise for his age. Cashin noticed things he never spoke of. How she touched the rose petals like they might break. How she lingered near the windows, as if trying to catch whispers from the wind. How she flinched when someone raised their voice in the hallway. And how, sometimes at night, he could hear the quiet sobs echoing down the long corridors, hers. He would stop at her door, but never knock. Cashin believed in distance. He believed in protecting people from himself. What was the point of love when love had betrayed every man in his bloodline? One night, Isla had forgotten her sketchbook in the study. The leather-bound journal lay open on the couch. Cashin picked it up, meaning only to return it. But the first sketch stopped him in his tracks. It was him, but not as he saw himself. Not cold, not guarded. She had drawn him kind. His throat tightened. For the first time in years, he felt something stir beneath the armor. The next morning, Isla found the sketchbook back on her table, with a note tucked between the pages. "You're talented. Don't stop drawing." Cashin. She stared at the handwriting for a long time, and when their eyes met at breakfast, he didn't look away. A new kind of quiet began. Not silence, but space. Space to observe, to wonder, space to feel. They began exchanging quiet observations. He asked if she preferred tea or coffee. She asked if he always walked the garden before sunset. He said he liked the way she arranged flowers in the library. She smiled for the first time, not out of politeness, but because something in her had warmed. My lovely listeners, have you ever lived with someone who felt like a stranger? Or found a spark in the silence where you expected coldness? If this story is awakening something in your heart, click that like button and share your thoughts below. Every chapter we write together is made brighter by your presence. Now, let's see what happens when a heart frozen in fear begins to thaw. The shift was subtle at first. Cashin no longer left the breakfast table the moment his coffee was finished. He lingered, asked if she had slept well, commented on the change in weather. Once, he even noticed a braid in her hair and said it reminded him of a painting he once saw in Florence. Isla blinked. "You've been to Florence?" He nodded. "For work. Years ago. Did you like it?" "I like the silence of cathedrals," he said, then paused. "But not as much as the silence here. It wasn't flattery. It was truth. And somehow, that made her cheeks warm." One morning, she found a stack of fresh sketch pads on her desk, tied with a simple velvet ribbon. No note this time, but she knew who it was from. She placed them beside the wildflowers she had gathered from the garden, heart fluttering. He never intruded on her quiet, but she began to notice his quiet, too. He worked from a glass-walled office, facing the sea. Isla could see the way his brow furrowed, how his jaw clenched as he read reports or listened to video calls with a motionless precision. But in the evenings he walked, always the same path, from the rose garden, across the bridge to the stone gazebo, then down the stairs to the cliff's edge where the ocean raged. She followed him once, at a distance. When he reached the cliff, he stood motionless, staring into the wind, eyes distant. She didn't call out, but her heart ached watching him. Whatever storm lived in him had nothing to do with her, and yet she wanted to be an umbrella for it. One afternoon, Isla stepped into the street near the city center while admiring the architecture, just as a car screeched around the corner. A horn blared. She froze. Strong arms yanked her backward. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Cashin snapped, breath shallow, voice shaking. Isla was trembling. "I didn't see." His hands cupped her face. "You don't walk in cities like you're still in the countryside." She couldn't reply. His closeness made it hard to breathe. His thumb brushed the corner of her mouth, not in affection, but in panic. "Don't do that again," he whispered, voice breaking slightly. "Please." It was the first time she saw it. Fear behind control. That night, they sat opposite ends of the rooftop garden. No words, just stars, wind, and the smell of night jasmine. After a long silence, he spoke. "My mother left when I was 10, he said. She wrote a note, took her jewelry, and disappeared. Isla turned her head, slowly. "I'm sorry." She said she couldn't breathe in this life. That being a Blake meant becoming a ghost. "And your father? He made sure I never forgot it. That love was weakness. That loyalty was owed, not earned." She looked down at her hands. Cashin continued. "That's why I didn't want to marry. Why I don't believe in opening the door." Isla swallowed hard. "And yet you did." His eyes met hers. "For him. But also," he hesitated, "because you looked at me like I wasn't a ghost." The silence that followed was heavy, full of unsaid things. She reached across the small marble table and placed her hand gently over his. It was the first time she had touched him deliberately, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. From that evening on, something shifted. Their silences became comfortable. Their dinner stretched past the dessert course. Cashin began telling her about his business, how he coded his first algorithm at 16, how he once lost $30 million in a single deal, how he built his company brick by unforgiving brick. And Isla spoke, too, about her mother's music, about wanting to become a teacher, about how she used to climb a fig tree and read books about cities she never thought she'd see. Cashin listened, not like someone being polite, but like someone who was memorizing her. One morning, a storm rolled over the estate. Thunder shook the walls. Rain pelted the windows like fists. Isla was curled up in a library when the power briefly flickered. Cashin appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "I didn't know if you'd had dinner." She smiled. "Thank you." He sat beside her, just far enough to be respectful, just close enough to feel. The room smelled of books, cinnamon, and something unnamed blooming between them. "Cashin," she said softly, "are you always like this? Guarded, distant?" He didn't answer for a while. Then, "I don't know how to be anything else." She nodded. "Maybe you don't have to change. Maybe just let me stay in the silence with you. That's enough." Cashin turned his head, looked at her like she had said something holy, and for the first time, he smiled. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The only sound was the slow turning of pages and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. And then, "Isla," he said. She looked up. Cashin's gaze was steady. "Do you regret it? This marriage?" The question startled her. She swallowed. "I don't know. Some days I feel like I married a shadow. Other days, I see the man behind it, and I wonder what it would be like if he let me in." His shoulders shifted, whether in pain or reflection. She couldn't tell. He met her eyes. "And you? Do you regret it?" "I never had a choice." "That's not what I asked." She closed a book in her lap. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I wanted something simple. A home, a job I loved, a man who didn't just look at me, but saw me, who wanted to stay." Her words hung in the air like glass. Cashin leaned forward, his hands clasped, his jaw tense. "I didn't know what to expect when I said yes to this arrangement. But I see you now, Isla. I see how strong you are. How gentle. How you make this hollow place feel less like a cage." She stood, hugging her arms. The emotions were too loud inside her, like a tide crashing against the edges of her ribs. "I should go," she said, stepping toward the door. But his voice stopped her. "Don't." She turned back. Cashin rose from the chaise slowly, like something sacred was unfolding inside him. "I've hurt you by keeping you at arm's length. I thought distance was safe. But I was wrong." He stepped closer. "May I?" She nodded barely. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then leaned down and kissed her forehead, so softly it felt like a prayer. Her breath hitched. His hands came to rest on her arms. "I don't want to keep pretending, Isla. Not if there's even a chance we could be something real." She closed her eyes. "I don't know how to do this. I've never..." Cashin's voice was almost a vow. "I won't rush you. I just want to hold you. That's all." She nodded again. He took her hand, warm, trembling, and led her through the silent hallways, past ballroom and grand staircases, to the east wing. His room. The first time she entered, she noticed it smelled like cedar and linen. Sharp, clean, lived in but untouched. He closed the door softly behind them and lit no lamp. Only let the moonlight pour across the bed like a silver veil. They stood there for a long moment. And then he kissed her, not like in the movies. Not fast or desperate, but slow, devotional, like he had been waiting his entire life for her permission. Her hands clutched his shirt, unsure, unpracticed. He pulled back, just enough to look into her eyes. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Don't stop." He kissed her again, deeper now but still careful. Every touch carried reverence, like he feared he might break her if he wasn't gentle enough. And when they finally undressed, it was like shedding years of solitude, layer by layer, silence by silence. When his hand brushed her lower back and he felt her tense, he paused. His voice shook slightly. "Have you ever?" She shook her head, and his entire body stilled. His eyes glistened. "Isla," he cradled her face in his palms, whispering like someone who just found a treasure buried beneath a battlefield. "You are precious." She had never heard that word said like this, like it was an oath, like he would guard it with his life. That night, Cashin didn't just make love to her. He worshipped her. He kissed her like she was art, held her like a fragile gift, moved with her like a slow confession of every word they'd never spoken. And when it was over, when her breath came soft and her heartbeat slowed beneath his, he tucked a blanket around them both. He didn't speak. He simply kissed her forehead again, and this time he stayed. The morning after that night, the Blake mansion felt different. Sunlight touched the marble floors more tenderly. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and sea salt. Even the silence between them had changed. It no longer echoed. It breathed. Isla woke to the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. She was wrapped in Cashin's arms, her head tucked beneath his chin, his heartbeat a lullaby against her cheek. For the first time since she entered this house, she didn't wake up alone. She stirred, uncertain if the magic of last night would remain when the sun rose. But when she looked up, Cashin was already awake, watching her. "You stayed," she whispered. "I couldn't have left," he said, voice hoarse, "even if I tried." The following weeks unfolded like petals of a long-closed flower. Cashin began coming home early, sometimes with fresh pastries from her favorite bakery downtown. He joined her in the library, sometimes just to sit in silence beside her. They shared stories over breakfast, laughter over lunch, and soft glances during dinner. He brought her to a Blake Tech benefit gala one evening. The moment she stepped out of the car, dressed in soft champagne silk, the room fell silent. Cashin didn't say anything, but the pride in his eyes was louder than any words. She dazzled not by effort, but by essence, graceful, curious, radiant. Every time she spoke, heads turned, and every time someone tried to corner her with flirtations or condescension, Cashin's hand would find the small of her back like an anchor. Later that night, as they danced under a chandelier, she whispered, "Why are you smiling?" "I never thought this would be my life," he murmured. "And then you walked into it." They painted the nursery together. It began with laughter, him splashing pale yellow on her cheek, her retaliating with a stroke of sky blue down his arm. Soon they were covered in streaks of paint, barefoot, messy, and breathless with joy. "Who knew a cold CO could laugh this much?" she teased, nose scrunched. He kissed her forehead, grinning. "Only you." Then came the test. The little plus sign, the stunned silence, and then her tears of fear, of joy, of disbelief. Twins, the doctor confirmed. Cashin blinked once, twice, then sat down slowly, his hand still in Isla's. "Two," he said faintly, staring at the sonogram. Isla's voice quivered. "Are you okay?" He looked up, eyes misted, and leaned in to kiss her knuckles. "I don't think I've ever been this okay." That night, he brought her favorite soup to bed and placed his hand gently over her belly. "Hi," he whispered, as if speaking to stars. "I'm your dad, and I already love you more than anything." Their evenings changed. He would read aloud to the twins, children's tales, poetry, his business notes when he ran out of stories. Isla would watch, heart swelling, as this man, once frozen in grief, now melted with every heartbeat inside her. They took long walks through the countryside, hand in hand, sometimes stopping by her childhood home, the abandoned cottage her father once owned. He stood on the porch beside her and whispered, "We can rebuild it if you'd like." She shook her head. "No, this place taught me how to endure, but you taught me how to live." He pressed his lips to her temple. "No, Isla, you taught me how to feel again." In her second trimester, she grew tired more easily, but Cashin adapted without hesitation. He insisted on carrying her sketchbooks, massaging her swollen feet at night, learning how to cook her odd cravings, even if it meant peanut butter on rice crackers at 2 a.m. One morning, she caught him pacing their bedroom, practicing lullabies. "Are you singing?" she asked, peeking from the sheets. He flushed. "Just preparing." Isla giggled. "You're going to be a wonderful father." He walked over and knelt beside the bed, his hand finding hers. "I was terrified to become my father," he whispered. "But when I look at you, I realize I don't have to. We're building something new, something beautiful." She kissed him then, soft, lingering, and the babies kicked. He gasped, "Was that?" She nodded through tears. He placed both hands on her belly, stunned. "I felt them." He laughed genuinely, boyishly. Isla had never seen him so free. They began choosing names late into the night. He suggested Elizabeth. She preferred Alara. He loved Theodore. She leaned toward Thorne, so they chose both. "Thorne and Alara Blake," he whispered one night, head resting on her stomach. Isla ran her fingers through his hair, smiling. "Sound like royalty." He chuckled. "They are." One quiet evening, as they stood together watching the sunset from their private balcony, he held her close and said, "Isla, I didn't just fall in love with you." She looked up. "I healed because of you. I became someone I'm proud of because you believed I could." She reached up and cupped his face. "And I became someone who finally felt loved because you stayed." He bent down, kissed her deeply, slow, reverent, not because they were newlyweds, but because they were soulmates. The Blake estate had never known such peace. With Isla's belly rounding gracefully and Cashin falling deeper in love by the day, their world had become a sanctuary, quiet, safe, sacred, until the past came knocking. It started with a whisper, a small column buried on page 7 of a business journal. "Whitmore and Blake, a marriage to bury a scandal?" Cashin read it first. Quietly, alone. He didn't mention it to Isla. He didn't want to worry her. Not when she'd just begun sleeping through the night again. Not when he just felt the twins kick for the first time as they danced barefoot in the kitchen 2 nights ago. But the whisper grew. A former employee leaked documents. Emails surfaced. Screenshots. Transaction logs. An investigative reporter pieced the puzzle together. Richard Whitmore had embezzled millions from the Blake Tech Philanthropic Trust, laundered it through shell donations, then siphoned the funds to cover personal debts. The charity scandal that had nearly brought Blake Tech to its knees 3 years ago, it now had a name, Whitmore, and a motive for the marriage, Isla. Cashin found her in the nursery, folding tiny clothes into hand-carved drawers. Her face lit up the moment she saw him, until she saw his expression. "Cashin?" she asked gently. He held out the newspaper. She read it in silence, and then she sat down slowly on the edge of the window seat, as if her legs had given out. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," Cashin said without hesitation. "I always did." She turned away, but not before he saw the shimmer of tears. "He used me," she said hollowly. "He used me to fix what he broke." Later that night, her phone rang. Richard. She stared at it for a long moment, then answered. "Isla," came her father's voice. "You've got to get your husband to keep this quiet. The press won't stop. I'm not your pawn anymore." "You listen to me, girl," he hissed. "I gave you a life." "No," she interrupted, voice trembling. "You sold me to save your own. And I went because I thought you still had a soul." His silence was sharp. "I have a family now," she continued, "and I'll protect it from you if I must." She hung up, then blocked the number. But the damage had already begun. The Blake Tech board called an emergency session. Shareholders demanded clarity. Headlines screamed betrayal. CEO marries the daughter of the man who robbed his company. Was Isla Whitmore a romantic pawn? From countryside to corporate cover-up, Cashin stood before the board, calm, controlled. But beneath that was fire. He let them vent, let them accuse. He listened as one director suggested a quiet leave of absence for optics. Another recommended distancing himself from Isla until the press cycle moved on. He leaned forward. "I'll make this clear once," he said, voice cold as cut crystal. Isla had no knowledge of her father's crimes. She is not a liability. She is not a strategy. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. She is my wife, my heart. And if this company cannot understand the difference between inheritance and integrity, then perhaps I should reconsider my role here entirely. Silence. No one dared reply. The press conference was Cashin's idea, not to protect himself, but to shield Isla. He stepped up to the podium, flanked by cameras and chaos. Isla watched from backstage, hand resting over her belly. I am Cashin Blake, he said into the microphones. CEO of Blake Tech, son of Lawrence Blake, husband to Isla Whitmore Blake, and soon to be father to twins who will grow up in a world where love matters more than legacy. Click, click, flash, he continued. Yes, Isla's father committed crimes. And yes, he once tried to leverage his daughter as a shield. But Isla is not her father's sins. She is the woman who brought me back to life. She is the reason I remember how to laugh. She is my truth. Cameras kept flashing. He looked directly into one lens. And if anyone believes I married her to cover up a scandal, they've clearly never seen a man fall in love with his wife's sketches or heard a baby's heartbeat under her ribs. A hush swept over the room. I stand with her. Always. Backstage, Isla couldn't breathe. She covered her mouth, tears running freely. He hadn't just protected her. He had claimed her, not as a transaction, but as his forever. When he returned home that night, she met him at the door, wrapped her arms around him before he could say a word. I'm sorry, she whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for, he said, pressing his forehead to hers. But I do. For what? For not tearing the world apart the moment it tried to question your worth. He kissed her then, fiercely, tenderly, and the twins kicked. Hard. They both laughed. Even in the storm, they had each other. Even in the fire, they built a home. The contractions came early. Too early. Isla was barely 34 weeks when she woke in a pool of warmth. The silk sheets beneath her stained dark and frightening. Cashin was at her side in seconds, voice sharp with fear as he called the doctor, carried her down the stairs barefoot, holding her like porcelain that might shatter. The hospital room was too white, too bright, too cold. Machines beeped. Nurses moved quickly. A monitor caught the baby's heartbeats. Two fluttering drums beneath the chaos. Cashin held Isla's hand as they wheeled her away. She smiled through the pain, lips trembling. Don't let go, she whispered. I'll never let go, he promised. But they took her behind closed doors. And Cashin was left in the hallway. For the first time in years, the cold, composed CO shattered. He fell to his knees. He buried his face in his hands and prayed. To a God he'd long forgotten. To the stars, to the memory of his mother who once told him that love was the bravest thing a man could choose. Take everything, he begged. Take my name, my company, my legacy, just don't take her. His voice cracked. Please, please let her stay. Hours passed. Then a nurse appeared. Mr. Blake? He rose slowly, eyes hollow. Your sons are healthy, she said with a smile. And your wife? She made it. Just barely. But she's strong. Cashin's knees gave again, but this time from relief. He wept without shame. Later, the three of them lay together in a quiet hospital suite. Cashin sat beside her bed, Isla's hand resting in his. She was pale, lips dry, but her eyes glowed with life. And something else. Love. You're here, she whispered. He brought her hand to his lips. I'll always be here. They're newborns, identical boys with his jaw and her eyes. Lace swaddled between them. Cashin stared at them like a man who'd been given back a future he never believed he'd deserve. That night he didn't sleep. He just watched her breathe. 2 weeks later, he brought her home. The Blake estate had changed. Soft lullabies replaced silence. Roses bloomed along the gates. And in the center of the garden, an arbor had been built. Wooden beams draped in white silk and fresh hydrangeas. Cashin led her there at sunset, barefoot and smiling. Cashin, she whispered, unsure. He turned to her, in a simple white shirt and no tie, hair tousled by the wind. I never gave you a real wedding, he said softly. And I never gave the words you deserved. Isla's breath caught. There were no guests, he continued. No cameras. Just us, the way it should have been from the start. She touched his chest, where his heart beat wildly. I don't need anything more. I do, he said, voice rough. And then he took her hand, slid a simple gold band onto her finger, and said the vows he should have spoken on that cold day months ago. I married you out of duty, but fell in love out of awe. You taught me what strength looks like, what grace feels like. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. He paused, eyes glistening. You were never the cost. You were the gift. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She leaned forward and whispered her vows against his lips. I was afraid of you, of us, but I stayed, and in staying, I found everything I thought I'd lost. Thank you for never letting go. They kissed, and this time, the wind carried laughter instead of silence. Inside, their twins stirred in their cradles, and beneath the arbor, where pain had once stood between them, only joy remained. They'd made it, not because fate was kind, but because love was stronger than legacy and braver than blood. Love doesn't begin with a contract. It begins in the quiet moments, the ones too easily missed. It blooms in how he watched her fingers tremble when she opened the nursery blinds, in the way she always paused at the sound of violin music, in how she looked up from her book just to meet his eyes across the room, even if she said nothing. It wasn't Isla's beauty that undid Cashin. It was her silence and how much it held, her steadiness, her resilience, her refusal to shatter, even when the world gave her every reason to. He didn't fall for the girl in the wedding dress. He fell for the woman who learned how to trust again, slowly, stubbornly, like a bloom that opens only when the sun rises just right. And Isla, she never needed a knight. She didn't need to be rescued or rewritten. She simply needed to be seen. Not as a debt, not as a duty, but as herself. Cashin gave her that. Moment by moment, brick by brick, they built something real, not from perfect beginnings, but from scars they stopped hiding, from confessions whispered at midnight, from shared tea and the sound of laughter echoing through halls that used to know only silence. Love by choice is stronger than love by force, because it stays when it doesn't have to. It grows even after it's been burned. It forgives. It believes. And in the end, it becomes a home you thought you'd never find. My beautiful souls, have you ever discovered that what began in duty ended in devotion? I hope this story reminded you that even the coldest hearts can thaw in the warmth of the right love, that silence can be the soil where trust takes root, and that no matter how your story begins, the next chapter can still be breathtaking. If you believe in second chances, in slow burn healing, and in vows that matter, then tap that subscribe button. Share this with someone who still believes in love written in quiet, persistent ink. Your heart belongs here. Until our next chapter, may you always be seen, always be chosen, and always be deeply, deeply loved.